For 10 years, millions of people watched the same show. They laughed at the same jokes, they cried at the same moments, and every single time Ross Geller appeared on screen, they cheered. He was the lovable one, the smart one, the good guy who just couldn't catch a break. But here's what I need you to understand before this video is over. The show you think you watched is not the show that actually aired. Because when you remove the laugh track, when you strip away the warm lighting and the cozy Central Perk sofa, what you're left with is a man who, across 10 seasons, never once took accountability for a single thing he did. Not once. And by the end of this video, I'm going to show you something that the writers of Friends accidentally revealed in Season 8. Something so dark about Ross that once you see it, you will never be able to watch this show the same way again. Stay with me, because this one goes deep. Before we go any further, welcome. If this is your first time here, this channel is dedicated to going beneath the surface of the shows you grew up loving, not to tear them apart, but to understand them at a level that most people never go to. This video is episode 1 of a full series we're doing on the characters of Friends, and I'm going to tell you right now, Ross is just the beginning. In the coming videos, we're going to sit with Chandler Bing and show you why his jokes were never actually funny. They were a survival mechanism. We're going to look at Phoebe Buffay, who was homeless at 14, lost her mother to suicide, never knew her real father, and the show turned every single one of those tragedies into a punchline. We're going to look at Monica, at Rachel, at Joey. Every single one of them is carrying something the show never fully dealt with. But you have to be here to get it. So if you're not subscribed, hit that button right now and turn on the bell, because I promise you, you do not want to miss what's coming next week. Now, let's talk about Ross Geller, and let's start exactly where his problems started.
There's a rule in psychology that most people know, but almost nobody applies to themselves. It goes like this: the adults we become are shaped almost entirely by the children we were allowed to be. Read that again. The adults we become are shaped almost entirely by the children we were allowed to be. And if you want to understand why Ross Geller is the way he is, you don't start with Rachel, you don't start with the divorces, you don't start with "we were on a break." You start with Jack and Judy Geller. Ross and Monica Geller grew up in the same house with the same parents in Long Island, New York. On the surface, they were a normal, comfortable, loving family, but beneath the warm Thanksgiving dinners and the Geller football cup, something deeply unfair was happening. Jack and Judy Geller had 2 children, and they treated them like they had one. Ross was the golden child, the medical miracle. That's what their parents called him, because they had originally been told they couldn't have children. So when Ross arrived, he was treated like a gift from the universe itself. Everything he did was celebrated. Every academic achievement, every spelling bee, every paper he published. Jack and Judy kept it all safe, stored it all carefully, preserved every memory of Ross like it was sacred history. And Monica? Monica's childhood was stored in boxes in the garage, right next to the drain pipe, and Jack used them as flood barriers to protect his Porsche. That is not a joke. That is a real scene from Season 7, Episode 13. Jack Geller ruined every piece of Monica's childhood, her artwork, her toys, her memories, to protect a car. And what does Jack say when Monica finds out? He doesn't apologize. He offers her the Porsche, as if a car could replace the fact that for her entire childhood, her parents treated her like background furniture while Ross sat at the center of the frame. Now here is where it gets psychological. When a child is raised as the golden child, told from birth that they are special, that they cannot do wrong, that the world should bend around them, that child does not grow into a confident adult. They grow into someone far more fragile. They grow into someone who has never once been held accountable for anything. And so, as an adult, when accountability is required, they have absolutely no muscle memory for it. They don't know how to sit in discomfort. They don't know how to say, "I was wrong," because in their entire developmental history, they never had to. That is Ross Geller, and I need you to hold that thought, because we're about to watch it play out across 10 seasons. Here's the thing about Ross that makes him so dangerous to analyze. He's not a villain. That's what makes him so interesting and so insidious. If Ross was cruel and obvious about it, if he was threatening or cold or clearly selfish, people would have seen through him immediately. But Ross has always had the perfect cover, the cover of being the good guy. He's the intellectual, the sensitive one, the guy who cried at movies and wrote love letters and pined quietly for Rachel for years before they ever got together. The show framed all of that as romantic, as admirable, as the proof that Ross was a man of feeling. But there is a term in psychology for exactly this kind of person. It's called nice guy syndrome. Nice guy syndrome is not simply about being kind. It describes a specific pattern of behavior where someone performs niceness, consciously or not, as a transaction. They are kind because they expect something in return. They are patient because they believe patience entitles them to a reward. And when the reward doesn't come, or when the other person doesn't behave the way the nice guy believes they should, the mask begins to slip. And boy, does Ross Geller's mask slip. Let's go through the evidence, not opinions, evidence from the show itself.
Exhibit A, The List. Season 2, Ross is dating Julie, a woman who genuinely cares about him. Rachel has shown interest. So what does Ross do? Does he have an honest conversation with either woman? No. He makes a list, a written comparison document. Rachel's column versus Julie's column, pros and cons, like he was comparing job applicants, not human beings. And then he leaves the list where Rachel can find it. Her cons column, written by the man who claimed to love her, includes the line that she's not smart enough. That's not a man who loves someone. That's a man who has been groomed since childhood to evaluate everything in terms of his own satisfaction. Exhibit B, Rachel's career. When Rachel finally breaks free from her wealthy background and starts building an actual career in fashion, Ross is not supportive. He actively undermines it. He resents her passion for her work because it means she has less time for him. He belittles her industry. He doesn't understand fashion. Therefore, in the architecture of Ross's worldview, it deserves no respect. Rachel's growth represents something threatening to Ross, a version of Rachel that doesn't center him. And that is something Ross Geller cannot tolerate. Exhibit C, Mark. When Rachel begins working alongside a male colleague named Mark, who is simply a professional contact, Ross spirals into a jealousy so consuming that it functionally destroys their relationship. He calls Rachel's work phone constantly. He shows up at her office with elaborate lunches. He makes her professional life about his insecurity. He forces her to choose between her career and managing his feelings. And when she finally, exhaustedly, asked for a break from the relationship, to breathe, to think, to just not have to carry the weight of Ross's jealousy for 5 minutes,
Ross interprets it as permission to immediately sleep with someone else. And then he spends the next 3 seasons and an entire decade of fan debate hiding behind 3 words. We were on a break. Let's talk about what actually happened in that moment, not what the laugh track told you to feel. What actually happened. Rachel calls Ross in distress. She leaves a voicemail saying she loves him and wants to work through things. Ross has already slept with someone else. He hears the voicemail, and his first instinct is not remorse, it's not guilt, it's concealment. He tries to hide it. Then, when Rachel discovers the truth, Ross doesn't say, "I'm sorry, I made a terrible mistake and I hurt you." He weaponizes a technicality. There's a concept in psychology called DARVO. It stands for deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It describes what happens when someone who has caused harm is confronted, and instead of owning what they did, they immediately reframe the situation so that they become the victim. And what does Ross do in every single confrontation across the entire run of Friends? DARVO. Every time. When Rachel confronts him about the night with Chloe, DARVO. The break becomes a legal defense. He was in the right technically. You can't hold me accountable because of the exact wording of what we said. When Emily, his second wife, asks him not to see Rachel anymore, Ross agrees, then immediately violates that agreement and is shocked that his marriage falls apart. He plays the wounded husband. He's the victim of an unreasonable woman. DARVO.
When he lies to Rachel about getting their Vegas marriage annulled, then doesn't get the annulment, and she finds out she is still legally his wife. He didn't lie out of malice, he explains. He just didn't want another failed marriage on his record. That's not honesty. That's self-preservation dressed up as vulnerability. Ross Geller was married 3 times by the time he was in his mid-30s. And the show treats this as a running joke, as a quirk, as one of those lovable Ross things. But I want you to hold that number in your mind, 3, because we are going to come back to it. And what I'm going to tell you about that number is something the show never had the courage to say out loud. 3 marriages, 3 divorces. Carol, his first wife, is a lesbian who was in the middle of an affair with another woman while still married to Ross. The show frames this as Ross being blindsided, the poor innocent husband betrayed by circumstances he couldn't control. But here's a question the show never asks. How do you spend years married to someone without noticing they are fundamentally unhappy? How does a man who claims to be emotionally intelligent, deeply sensitive, a person of great feeling, miss that entirely? Either Ross wasn't paying attention, or Ross was paying attention only to the parts of Carol that served him. Emily, wife number 2. Ross meets Emily. They fall in love at extraordinary speed and plan a wedding. On the day of their wedding, at the altar, Ross says Rachel's name. Not Emily's, Rachel's. And let me be clear, this is not presented as an accident in the psychological reading of this character. This is a man who has spent years making every relationship a competition with the ghost of Rachel Green. Every woman he dates is either a substitute for Rachel or a rebellion against her. He never processes the original wound, he just cycles through people. And Emily, who had every reason to walk away immediately, tries to make the marriage work. One request,
from a woman whose wedding day had just been publicly humiliated by her new husband saying another woman's name. Ross agrees, and then almost immediately begins making excuses for why he still needs to see Rachel. Emily was right to leave. Emily was not the problem. And now, the darkest one. Here is the thing the show accidentally reveals in the later seasons, and barely anyone caught it. Ross has a son, Ben Ross, Ben Geller, born in season 1, Ross's child with Carol. Ben appears regularly in the early seasons. Ross plays with him, makes him Hanukkah costumes, pushes for custody, fights for involvement, plays the devoted father. But as the seasons progress, and especially once Emma is born, his daughter with Rachel, something strange happens. Ben disappears.
Not gradually, not explained, just gone. No scenes, no mentions, no birthday parties, no school plays. Emma's first birthday? Ben is not there. Rachel's pregnancy? Ben is barely referenced. The final episode of the entire show, where Ross and Rachel reconcile and begin their life together. Ben is not mentioned once. Fan theory, supported by the evidence in the show itself, suggests that Ben's disappearance from Ross's life mirrors exactly what Ross does in every relationship. When something no longer serves his primary narrative, when it no longer fits the story he is telling himself about who he is, it fades out. Carol moved on. Carol found Susan. Carol built a full, warm, complete life, and Ben was at the center of it all. Ross, who could not control that family unit, who could not be the hero in that story, slowly stopped showing up. Not because he was evil, but because Ross Geller has never learned how to love something that doesn't reflect his image back to him. That is not a sitcom moment. That is a tragedy. There is one more layer to Ross Geller that most analyses miss entirely, and it's important because it explains so much of his behavior in a way that pure narcissism alone doesn't cover. Ross has a desperately fragile sense of masculinity, and the show actually documented it in extraordinary detail, while laughing at it. Season 3, Episode 4. Emma is playing with a Barbie doll, just a child playing with a toy, and Ross is physically uncomfortable. He tries to redirect Ben to more masculine toys. He can't let it go. His 4-year-old son's choice of toy becomes a Ross Geller problem, because in Ross's architecture, even his child's behavior reflects on him. Season 9. Ross and Rachel hire a male nanny, Sandy. Sandy is warm, nurturing, emotionally intelligent, and brilliant with Emma. Ross fires him. Not because Sandy did anything wrong, because Sandy made Ross feel inadequate. Sandy was good at something Ross told himself only women were supposed to be good at: nurturing, emotional presence, care. And a man doing it well felt like a threat to Ross's identity. Ross is a man who spent his entire childhood being told he was exceptional. He got a PhD. He became a professor. He published research. And yet, underneath all of that, he is perpetually terrified that he is not enough. That without his accomplishments, without his titles, without the validation of the group and of Rachel, he is nothing. The divorces, the controlling behavior, the jealousy, the inability to take accountability, the way he slowly disappeared from Ben's life. None of it is malice. All of it is fear. Ross Geller is a man who was never taught to sit with discomfort, never taught to fail, never taught to lose. And so every time life required him to do those things, he ran, he manipulated, he rewrote the story so that he was the hero of it, even when the evidence said otherwise. Here is what I want to leave you with. The reason Ross Geller is so important to analyze, the reason this matters beyond just picking apart a sitcom character, is because Ross Geller is not fictional.
He is every person who was loved too conditionally as a child and never told. He is every nice guy who couldn't understand why things kept going wrong because nobody ever showed him the mirror. He is the product of parents who meant well but built something fragile instead of something resilient. And Friends, for all its warmth, for all the joy it gave us, made a choice. It chose the laugh track over the truth. It chose the happily ever after over the honest reckoning. Ross and Rachel end up together in the finale. She gets off the plane and the studio audience erupts. And we're supposed to feel the warmth of that, the completion of a love story a decade in the making. But ask yourself this: Rachel Green, a woman who spent years building her career, her independence, her identity outside of this relationship, gives up a dream job in Paris to go back to a man who has spent 10 years cycling through the exact same patterns, who has never once, in a single episode, sat down, looked honestly at himself, and said, "I am the problem here." The show gave us the ending we wanted, not the ending that was true. And maybe, just maybe, that's the darkest thing about Friends. Not what it showed us, but what it asked us to accept. Now, I need to know what you think. Do you agree with this reading of Ross Geller? Or do you think the show got it right, that Ross deserved Rachel in the end? Drop your take in the comments. I genuinely read every single one, and the best comments from this video are going to shape what we cover in the series. Because here's the thing, this was just episode 1. Next week, we are sitting with Chandler Bing, and I'm going to show you something that will make you see every single one of his jokes differently. You know that moment in season 1 where Monica tries to make Chandler cry and he physically cannot do it? That's not a quirk. That is a documented psychological response to a specific kind of childhood. And once I walk you through what Chandler actually experienced growing up, you will never laugh at one of his jokes again without feeling it somewhere deeper. That video drops next week. If you are not subscribed, you are going to miss it. Hit subscribe, hit the bell. And if this video made you think, share it with someone who loved Friends, because I promise you, the conversation it starts is worth having. I'll see you next week.